Guys, well, welcome back. Today we're going to do some brakes. The vehicle that we're working on right here is a 2016 Toyota Camry. Customer stated that there's a grinding in the back. Under further inspection we found that the rear brakes are metal to metal. So you can kind of see here the little outer edge of this rotor is actually starting to get ground down by the brake pad. So today we're going to learn how to do it. What I like to do is get to my bleeders. So the brake bleeder typically is found on the very top of the brake caliper. So there's sometimes a little rubber dust boot that they put on here to kind of protect it. So you can just get underneath there with a little flathead and you can pop it up a little bit and pull it off. So I'm just going to make sure that this fits on there. Kind of good rule of thumb is if you give this thing a little tighten first, and then you should be able to kind of loosen it. It gives you the ability to kind of just make sure that this thing is going to come free for you. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side real quick. And what we'll do is we'll do a collapse of the brakes so that we can take them apart. So if I open that bleeder, what that's going to allow me to do is it's going to allow me to come in here. If I take this pry bar, I can come in between this hole and I can get onto the brake rotor itself, and I can start to kind of pull back on the brake caliper. And what it will do is we'll start to compress the piston inside of there so that we can come in and service the brakes. So why I open that bleeder is I'm trying not to contaminate the system with any of the old brake fluid, because what we're going to do too is we're going to make sure that we bleed the brakes in this car. So it's right around the 50,000 mile mark, and it's kind of a good rule of thumb to be able to do that. And it just makes it easier too, so that you can kind of get this thing apart. So I just kind of collapse that, and all I'm going to do is hold it, and I'm going to make sure that I just close up that bleeder real quick, so that way we don't leak out any more fluid than we need to. Same thing over here on the other side. I'm just going to pop that open. Alright, so with that fully compressed, close that bleeder up. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make sure that my caliper slides, so these up here are called your caliper slides. I'm just making sure that this thing moves free. It should. If it doesn't, then you may run the risk of having to replace the sliders or taking them apart, but you can see that this moves pretty nice and free. Next step is going to be getting the calipers off. And in the back side, you'll see there's a bolt right here, and there's a bolt right here, and those are the caliper mount bolts for the mounting bracket. So if I come on here, just a little pull the trigger, these come free, and I'll be able to take these two bolts out, and these will hold the caliper in place. So I'm going to make sure that I do. So I take this caliper, I'm going to put it up here for a second, and then I'm going to grab a caliper hanger. So what's a caliper hanger? This is just a piece of 1/4 inch round bar that we just bent up, so it kind of looks like an S. And what that will help us do, so I take it and I just put it through the bolt hole. I can put it on the spring. I've now got my piston exposed, so I can kind of see what's going on, see if there's any leaks, and I can make sure that I fully retract that in, but also it's protecting this brake hose. So this hose comes up here. You don't want to let the calipers hang off of it, because the hose can get damaged on the inside. So just make sure you hang that thing up all the way, so if you're taking stuff apart, it doesn't fall. This right here, this is your caliper bracket that has an outboard pad and an inboard pad, and these two bolt holes, which are just pretty much right below where the caliper was. And I'm going to put this socket on there. So same thing on my gun, put my socket on, and I'm going to pull these bolts out. So with those out, this bracket comes free. And then what we can do is we can inspect this. So what I'm looking for is my caliper slides to be able to move freely in and out, but also I want to make sure that my dust boots that are here are not torn. They don't have any rips to them or anything along those lines. But then I'm also going to look at what my pads were doing. So you can see here that this brake pad and this one are a little abnormally worn. So if I can push these in, which isn't that easy to do on this one, you can see that this brake pad, if you looked at it at the bottom, it would look great. But if you look at the top of the side, it's got like a pizza cut to it. So that this pad was actually jammed in and stuck. And this one's probably going to be the same way, pretty close to it. Sometimes they get stuck in there with some rust. If you just take a little hammer, you can whack these out. So I'm just looking, I can see too that this has kind of a tilt this way, so this pad was jammed kind of offset. And it's one of those things that this is pretty common that you find with brakes that have an abnormal wear. Like you can see, that's how the flat surfaces were. These brakes probably didn't work too well. And what usually happens is there's these little metal pieces here, and these are called shims. And these, if you just take a little pick or screwdriver, you should be able to pop these off. And what these do is they not only hold around the brake pad, so they kind of go on and they clip onto it, but they make it so that there isn't any noise out of it, and they try to eliminate any vibrations or chatter. But they give spacing in between here, so you can kind of see that there's some rust buildup that happens underneath them. A couple different ways of doing it is you can take a wire brush, and if I took the wire brush, I can come in here and I can try to clean this up as best as possible. And what will happen is you can get it pretty close, but you're still going to feel the surface, and it will have kind of some roughness to it. So if you take a little bit of a file, if you have this at home, and you can file it, or you can even take a little bit of sandpaper, and all I'm trying to do is I'm just trying to get this back surface cleaned up. So it'll take you a little bit to do this, and you can kind of get that where it needs to be. What I like to do too is, we've got a sandblaster, so I'll actually take these and I'll put them in the sandblaster to clean these up. So we got it back from the sandblaster. You can see that this is actually in pretty good shape now. It's one of those pieces that if you just spend a little bit of time, you can do it by hand. Like I said, a little bit of sandpaper can make it a world of difference with it. I'm just going to take a little bit of brake cleaner. I'm going to spray down the surface, and I'm just going to take a little Scotch-Brite pad, and I'm just going to scuff it up so that you get any other loose stuff off, and just make sure that the surface is nice and prepped for the new components. So our next big piece here is going to make sure that our dust boots are okay, and then the seal on them is alright. So if you'll notice, if I wipe this off, that there is a difference between these two. So right off the bat, you'll notice that the one on my left does not have a little rubber grommet. So what that's for is anti-chatter, so when you hit the brakes you don't have like a knock noise come out of the brakes. So it's important that you put these in the right position. So when you take these apart, just keep note of that it goes on one side, not the other. And it's typically going to be on the bottom, so that when the caliper gets brake pressure applied to it and it rocks, you don't hear a click click out of the brakes. But what I like to do is, if you can see right here, this kind of groove right here, that's where this seal in here goes. So I just take this over to the wire wheel, I just wire wheel this up, and I clean out that groove and I clean around just the kind of the mating surfaces so that we don't have to worry about it. So we're at our wire wheel, and this is what we're going to use to clean up this surface. So if I turn this on, make sure your safety glasses are on, and I'm just going to push this in and slowly rotate it around towards me so that I can see what's getting cleaned. So I'm cleaning that hex piece, but then I'm trying to get into the groove. Alright, so now that we have these cleaned up, you can see that this groove around here is nice and free of any rust or any dirt or any grime. Same thing with on this one. So what that's going to allow is for a proper seal in here. So it allows for this dust boot to make sure that it stays on, it doesn't pull off. And then what we're going to do next is just kind of wash these out with a little bit of parts cleaner, so brake parts cleaner. And what I do is I take the slide that doesn't have the rubber on it, and I just kind of move it in and out. And what that will do is that will ensure that you kind of break up any of the grease or dirt or anything that's in there. And I'm just going to wash this out one more time. Give it a little wipe off, make sure the seals are good. Then what we'll do, take a blowgun, and I'm just going to take this, I'm going to put the blowgun inside here, wrap around, and I'm just going to blow out any of the dirt or grime that's inside of there. So same thing on this side, 2 bolts. The bolts off, we can take the caliper up, we can put our hanger through one of the holes, hanging on the spring. Same thing, we're going to get this bracket off, got my larger size, 17 millimeter, put that on there. So we're going to do the same process that we just did. I'm just going to knock these pads out. You can see, same deal. That outboard pad is very worn. The inboard pretty close, but it's actually worn relatively straight, so not too bad. Alright, so this is how we're going to do it by hand. Like I said before, there's different ways of doing it. We just use a sandblaster for the other one. If we just use a wire brush, just to kind of show you how to do it on this, we're going to get pretty close to the same repair. So I take my file and I start to file this down. You can see that it's going to slowly start to take this rust off, and it's going to give me a surface that I'll be able to work with. It does take a lot longer to do it this way. Alright, so you can see a little bit of time, a little bit of effort. You can use the file, the wire brush, and a little bit of sandpaper. You can get that same kind of look. We're going to do the same thing with these slides. And take them out and we'll inspect them, see what they need. So you can tell that this is on the other side now, where it was on the right side before, now it's on the left. So it does change side to side. So just make sure that when you're doing this, you put them back where they're supposed to go. Just like before, blowgun. Just blow these out. And we'll just inspect the seals. Make sure there's no tears or rips or cuts. And we'll lubricate our slides. Like I said, I like to do twice. Move it up, put it in, work it around, and just make sure that the oil, or I should say, make sure that the grease gets inside there. And no, you can't use whatever grease you have laying around. You gotta use this stuff. Alright, so now with the brake caliper slides and the mount brackets all cleaned up and ready to go back on, we're gonna take the old brake discs off. So sometimes you can get lucky where they'll be like this side where they come off pretty easy. So there's a little rubber grommet right here. And what that does is that just goes through the brake rotor. And if you notice that there's 5 holes here, and what those are for is on the bottom. You can see there's a little star adjuster here. So what that's for is that's for the parking brake. So this grommet's inside the rotor, and it allows you to take a tool to come in and either tighten or loosen this. So what we're looking for is we're looking to make sure that these brake shoes on both sides are intact. They're not missing. So you can see, like, this is the shoe lining, and you can see it's got these little white tabs or white markings on them. That's actually a factory marking to indicate thickness. So to me, these are almost brand new. I'd say that the customer that owns this car probably doesn't use their parking brake as much as they should. So these are in pretty good shape. All we got to do is we'll pull the other side off. So sometimes you need to take these off with a hammer because you can try to pull on them and they won't come off. So if you take yourself a good hammer and you can hit the rotor in specific places. So I try to steer people away from hitting the studs. So these right here are called the wheel studs. That's what hold the wheel on. So if I slipped and hit that, now I'm going to be putting a stud in the car, or I'm not going to be able to get the wheel on if I didn't pay attention to it. But if this is a rotor that you were going to say reuse because you're doing a different procedure, I typically say if you came around this outer edge here and you hit in between the stud channel and just kind of hit here, you can break the rust free that's kind of happened around this hub. Or you can take the rotor surface, if it's a rotor that you're not going to use again, and you can hit on the rotor surface itself. The only thing what you want to be careful with that is if you hit this too hard, sometimes they will shatter and they'll break off. So I try to eye on the side of caution, and I'll come up here. If I take this up here and you just hit on it, it'll break the rust free, and then this will come off. Sometimes you gotta give it a little wiggle side to side or back and forth to kind of get some of the parking brake shoes to release. Sometimes they stick on there, but you should be able to get it off. And usually what holds up is a light little rust ridge that might kind of appear in here. And the same thing, I'm just going to check over here, make sure that these shoe linings look pretty good, and making sure that there isn't any leaks or types of oils in there. If there isn't, then what we'll do is we're going to wash this down, and we're going to clean up the calipers and get it ready for reassembly. So what I like to do is I'll take some brake cleaner and I'll hose down any of the dust that's in here. So what that will do is it'll make it so that hopefully you get some less squeaks out of this. It's just a nicer job when you kind of spend a little extra time on the details. And I'm just looking at all of the hardware, so the springs and the clips. I'm just making sure they're intact and nothing's broken. And then I'm just going to take this main hub piece and I'm just going to give this a little quick wire brush treatment. So I'm going to go around the center part of this hub. Why I'm doing that is that's where the brake rotor lies, that's where the wheel lies, and that's where they all center on each other. So as long as you kind of get this surface nice and clean, things should go together a little bit easier. So I just take the surface, wire brush it up. They do make other tools that you can use for this that are air powered, but wire brush or a little piece of sandpaper works pretty well. Again, give it a little rinse, make sure that the place is all nice and clean. And then what we'll do is we'll clean up the piston up here. So same deal, a little bit of cleaner. I'm going to take this wire brush and I'm just going to lightly scrub around the rubber seal here. That's what they call a dust seal. And same thing with the surfaces where the brake pads sit. Let's move this so we can see a little better. I'm just going to rinse this out. And sometimes you'll get the piston all the way in when you retract it, but in this case we didn't get it all the way in. But we'll do that right now with a. All right, so to collapse this a little bit more, I'm going to use a big pair of channel lock pliers. So you can use a big C-clamp if you have that at home, but if you just take this, what I'm trying to do is I'm just going to size it up so that I'm on the back of this bolt, and then I'm going to be right where the piston is. I'm going to take one of the old brake pads, and what that's going to help me do is make sure I don't make any marks on this piston. So if I take this old brake pad, I put this here, and I squeeze it, that piston should go all the way in and be pretty level with it. And sometimes you gotta take this little dust seal and you just gotta roll it around with your finger just to make sure that's level. So I'm trying to make sure that the surface is nice and smooth across there, and it'll be good. I'm gonna go over and do the other side. Same process. You can kind of see this one's got a little bit up already, but what I'll do is I'll push this one in real quick first, and we'll get it all cleaned up. Alright, so that's in. Alright, same process, a bit of brake cleaner. I'm just gonna brush around, make sure this is kind of cleaned up. You guys will see that this dust seal is sitting up a little bit, and they'll do that but you want to make sure that when you put this back together that you get that to kind of seat back in where it needs to be. So sometimes you just have to take it and you have to pinch and pull on it a little bit and get it to kind of leave any air pocket that may be in it. You just kind of work it around with your finger until this thing kind of seats in where it should be. So once that's flat, I don't run the risk of getting that pinched behind the brake pad. So same deal here on the side. Give it a little rinse and clean up this hub. All right, so now we're at the point where we're going to put the new parts on the vehicle. So I've got a couple boxes here. These are 2 brand new brake rotors. This right here is a brake pad set. So just open up the boxes. Kind of talk about this for a second. So brake rotors usually come in a couple different ways, whether they be coated like this one, where this has got like this nice silver coating to it, so it's like a high temperature paint, and what that does is that protects all the surfaces that aren't touched by the brake pads and the brake shoes to be protected by rust. So these are nice. You spend a little extra money on them, and they kind of last a lot longer. And then also, if you notice that this is one solid disc, so this is actually called a solid brake disc. And they have ones that the front of the car would have, which would be almost 2 of these together, and inside of it would have vanes, and those are called ventilated discs. So you just want to make sure that you take this and match it up to the old one. So I've got one of the old brake rotors here. Sometimes there may be variances in size, but you just want to make sure that overall they look the same, and they do. So what we're going to do for this is I'm going to take a little tiny bit of this high temp brake grease, and I'm going to go right around this hub surface. And what that's going to do is that's going to make it so that this will go on there, but also it won't allow for it to stick on there later down the line. And then I'm going to take our little adjuster plug, and this is going to go here in this recessed one. So I just plug that in there, and then I'll go from that to on the car. So these you actually have, is nice. You don't have to wash these off. Sometimes you get them and they'll have like a greasy coating on them. Just make sure your hands are clean, and you're not touching the rotor surfaces with dirty hands. So this has 5 provisions for that adjuster hole, so it doesn't really matter how this goes on, but keep in mind some cars will have it where there'll be just 1 hole, so make sure you line that up with it. So I'm just going to put this up here so that this lines up, and it should slide on pretty easy. And you just want to make sure it seats down all the way, and then what we'll do next is we'll start to build the rest of the brakes. So I'm just going to do the same thing on the other side. I'll get this other brake rotor on real quick. Put this out of the bag, and this will go on the car. So not a very complicated step, but pretty simple. Just lube this up. So that's lubricated. We'll come up and we'll put our disc on. And that's in place. Now it comes down to the brake pads. So if you take these out of the box, there's a couple different things inside of here. So we have our brake pads. So there should be 4. So a brake pad set is usually for per axle, so whether it be the front or the rear. And then we have another couple pieces in here, which are our hardware and our clips. So if you look at the old pads, we have here, we have our outside pads, and with the inside that have the piston on it. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to try to make sure that I have the same type of clip placement as the original. So These clips right here are called wear indicators. So what they should do is squeal. So the way that these work is that if you can imagine this being inside the bracket, so this would be one side and that would be the other. These squealers will be opposite of each other. But what happens is this should be like the right rear. So if this was in the bracket and the brake rotor is spinning around, it'll take up and it will touch here and it will make this squeal every time you hit the brakes. And what that is just an indication that the brakes are worn. If you had them around the other way, so say the squealer was up here, if you hit the brakes, this would most likely just get pushed and bent out of the way and it would stop squealing. So if you put it in a direction so that it's going to rub, it'll work better for you. So I'm just going to take these and make sure that I kind of copy what those were. Sometimes they may be labeled like inside, outside, or whatnot, but these aren't. So I'm just going to do that, and I'm going to do the same thing for these other ones. So I have all my clips in place. So next part is these are going to be our clips that are going to replace these. So these are a noise isolation clip, and they also hold the pad into place. So these have a little coating on the back to kind of protect them. Sometimes they'll be different from side to side if they're thicker or smaller, so you just have to kind of keep an eyeball on that. But the way it works is it's got this little kind of piece here, and what happens is that acts kind of like a fish hook, so that goes up and in, and all I do is I put down on the bottom and making sure that I push these down so that they're down on the bottom of this bracket, laying down here, so they're seated against the bottom. And then I'm just going to push the center of this up so that it locks in and it's flat inside there, so that when the brake rotor is inside this channel, it doesn't rub on it. Same thing here. I'm just making sure that it pushes up and in, and those are seated. And all I need to do now is put a little bit of lubrication on the slides where the pads are going to rest. So I'm going to go on the top on that little edge, along here, and I'm just going to do the first, quarter or half of this stainless piece. And what that's going to do is that's going to allow for the brake pad to slide easy. So you want to make sure that the brakes apply and come off easy. So we just want to make sure that we're doing that. So now I'm going to do a little lubrication on here. I'm doing the same thing right around the edge where it would rest, and I'm just being very careful not to get anything on the pad surface. And then I'm going to take a little bit on my back, and what that's going to be is that's going to be my inside pad. So if I take this in here, I can rest that in. So I'm just making sure that this moves nice and free. Now these pads should slide, no problem. Nice and easy, just like that. If you have to use a hammer to get them in or get them out, it's usually an indication that you need to clean the back part of this so that these pads fit a little bit nicer. By no means should you ever take a brake pad to a bench grinder or sandpaper or anything like that and grind down the sides of this so that it fits. If you're doing that, you're doing the brakes wrong. These things should slide together nice and easy, just like that. Nice. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my 2 bolts and hold it, and I'm going to put this up inside here. I'm going to get my brake pads right around, and I just kind of squeeze it so that they're close. If you come on the back side, you should be able to line up your bolts. Start everything by hand. So I'm just coming in, making sure that these are all started by hand first, and then I'll snug them up by hand, and then after that do calipers. So we're just do the same thing here on this side. Just gonna go same deal. inside. And I'm just inserting my bolts. Everything by hand. Sometimes you gotta move the bracket around a little bit to kind of get it to go in. But always do both by hand first. If you tighten one up all the way, you're probably not going to get the other one in because it's going to be off centered. All right, so what we have now is a torque wrench. So the rear specifications for the main bracket bolts is 58 pound-feet of torque. So these are hard to read sometimes, but if you can see it, it's a little scale there, and in the middle it's kind of the breaking point. So on the side it's the evens, and then it's the odds on the other side. So I'm going to try to roll this up to 58. So I'm just going to come in here and I'm going to snug these up by hand so that they're in place. And then I'm going to torque these. So torque on fasteners is very important, because what it does is it tightens the bolt to a specific number so that the fastener will not loosen. So this one's 58 pound-feet of torque, so this is set it. What happens is when you start pulling down on this, it's going to click, and when it clicks, it's tight. So I'm just going to gently pull down. Feel that. So see that click right there? That means it's tight. You don't want to keep pulling on it, because then you over tighten it. If you over tighten the fastener, you actually can cause the bolt to stretch or strip out, and then you're going to have to replace that. So I'm just double checking, making sure it's tight. So just a gentle, easy pull on it, and it will make sure that those are torqued appropriately. So once you have it on, put my socket on my torque wrench, and I'm just going to tighten these. All we got to do is put them on. So I just take my hooks off, and then if you just take one, it's kind of a good rule of thumb. If you can get like the top one where you can see, and I'm just going to put my bolt in, and I'm just going to slowly try to get that threaded in. Like I said, everything by hand. So I got one in, and then what I can do is I can push this in just a little bit, and then I can push this down, get that one into place, snug it up. Same thing over here. And get one in. It makes it a little bit easier to get the other one in once you get one on. And just make sure you push them in. Now with these require 20 pound-feet of torque. But what typically happens is I'll go to tighten this, and this whole piece will spin. So what's nice is they actually have provision there for a wrench. So it's a 14mm wrench, and it's a 14mm socket. So I'm going to roll this down to 20 pound-feet. So all I'm doing here, same deal. I'm putting it here, but I'm going to take my wrench, I'm going to put it on and hold it. Same click. I'll just show you on the top. If I try to turn it, sometimes it will just start to spin. Just give this thing a little. Again, just holding that inside fastener with the wrench. I'm going to tighten the bolt. Alright, so once those are tight, now all we have to do is bleed the brakes. So, like I did before, I'm just going to open this bleeder just a little bit. And what I'm watching for is any air bubbles. So if I open that, you'll notice the fluid comes out. Now the fluid's relatively clean in this car, but we're going to go through and flush it anyway. I'm going to go around to all of my bleeders. So all the brakes gonna have them. So even on the front here, you're gonna have a bleed screw. Same deal as if you little tighten, little loosen, it should come right out. And you should be. So you can kind of see that some bubbles coming out of there, which is normal. But we're just gonna give this thing a little bleed and some new fluid, and then we'll know that all the brakes should be working pretty well. It's a good process or habit, I should say, to get into, of doing the brake fluid regularly. So what I mean by that, I mean every time you change the brakes, yes, you should be changing the brake fluid. Should you be stuffing the fluid back up into the master cylinder by squeezing the thing, the pads together? No. And it's something that doesn't take long. So with the helper in the car, all I'm going to do to kind of show you is I'll have them pump the brake pedal a couple times. So they'll go on the floor, off the floor, on the floor, off the floor 3 times. And I'm going to tell them to hold it. And they'll hold the brake, and I'll crack the bleeder open, and you'll watch the fluid and air come out. And then what I'll do is I'll close the bleeder, and then I'll have them pump again. So when the bleeder's open, their foot is always on the floor. So what that's allowing is for pressure to go out, but nothing to be drawn back in. So I'm going to lower this thing down real quick. I'm going to add new fluid into the master cylinder. So what is brake fluid? So brake fluid is a fluid that's designed just for brakes. It's a hydraulic fluid, and there's some specific pieces to it. So you have to make sure that you're putting the right stuff in. So on here, this is your master cylinder. If you pull this cover off, like this one, it's not a twist or anything, it's just kind of a peel off. On top of it, you guys can see it says .3, .4. So this system has been designed for a .3 or .4 fluid. Primarily how you want to think about it is you can always go up in number, but you can never go backwards. So if this system says .3 and all I had was .4, I could put that in. But if it was a .4 system, I couldn't put .3 in. So this is actually a blended fluid that's designed for both. And DOT stands for Department of Transportation, and that's just the level of the fluid. So it's pretty much the protection rate and some other stuff to it. But it protects it to 470 degrees. So what it does is it tries not to boil. So a hydraulic fluid is under pressure, and that's what's making the brakes work. So if you have a fluid in there that can boil, you get a gas, and when the gas is in there, you lose the pressure from the hydraulics. So this is what they call a hydroscopic fluid. It's designed in the absence of water, so it has 0 water in it, and it's one of those things that you want to make sure when you're using this fluid, you use a new bottle. If you're using an old bottle, you run the risk of it having moisture content in it, and when it does that, you may have an issue with the brakes on like a panic stop or an emergency stop or something along those lines. So we want to just make sure it's new fluid. I just opened this a few minutes ago, so I'm just going to top this thing off, and then what we'll do is we'll bleed the brakes. So to fill this up, there's usually a full and a low mark or a max mark. The max mark on this is actually right here. What we're going to do, seeing that we're going to alleviate some of the fluid that's in here, we're going to overfill this for right now. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to bleed the brakes. So I'm going to wait for them to get in, we'll pump them up. So pump on the pedal. All right, hold it. I'm going to open this. See clear fluid come out. Pump it. So no bubbles, no dirt, that's good. Pump it.
Hold it. Down.
Pump it.
Hold it. Down. Down.
Pump it.
Hold it. Down.
Perfect. All right, so once that's bled, there is a procedure that you go through. So if you notice, I went from right rear to left rear to right front to left front. So ideally what you want to do is go from the farthest away from the master cylinder to the closest, so that it'll hopefully push all the air bubbles, if there's any, from the farthest point away, so that you can get everything out of the system. And what we'll do is just make sure that we eyeball the fluid and top it off where we need to. So the fluid level is actually right at the max, so we're good. So we don't even have to top off anymore. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use some parts washer, and I'm just going to clean off any of that brake fluid that I had that dripped off of there, because you just want to make sure that there's no residual fluids that can make like a burning smell or anything along those lines. And just makes it easier for noticing if there's any leaks. I'm just going to put all these dust covers back on. And then from there we can get the wheels on it. Well guys, that's it. I hope that this brake video was helpful to you in some way. Just make sure you guys like and subscribe, and look every week for some more content. See you guys soon.